I'm Gladys, and Director of Omni Center, and I know y'all, so I don't know what really to say.
Well, tell us what your zodiac sign is.
Well, I'm an Aries. Don't do that. Don't just tell us. Okay, Jay, you're next. You're next. What's your name?
I was born in Harrison, Arkansas.
We're all still one man. My name is Molly, and I'm a Scorpio. Quinn, and I'm a Gemini. Ida, and I'm another rabbit. All right. Another rabbit.
You're gonna make it work on that one.
I'm a fire crow. Fire crow? What crow is it? Oh, okay. Fire rooster.
I'm Jeannie. I'm a Virgo with an Aries moon and a Leo rising sun.
I'm Paula Marie Daughter, and I'm also Virgo.
Very weak.
Not really.
My Aries. Say your name. You're a Capricorn. I'm Shelley, and I'm a Chinese boar and a Leo. I'm a Leo. I'm Teresa.
I'm Rhea. I'm an Aquarian.
And what about our
Aubrey?
Some of you were at my birthday party last night, so you know I'm a Scorpio.
Oh, yeah, your name again is? Your name?
Aubrey Shepherd.
Okay, let's hand it over to Julie.
Okay, first thing I'd like to do is negotiate for when we're going to end the group, because I really want to make sure I allow some time for discussion, and I gotta know when we're quitting. So,
Let's give you till 3:30.
yeah, I probably need to quit by 3:25 or so. So, and if anyone needs to leave earlier, that'll be fine. But we're giving something to aim for. Okay, and I'm gonna pass out a handout that I have. There may not be quite enough for everybody. My printer was running out of ink, but you can share if you need to. And there'll be a couple times over the course of the meeting today that I'll ask you to look at some particular thing on here. But mostly this is just some of the key ideas of what I'm going to be talking about, and I just want you to be able to take it home with you and so on. You don't need to follow along while I'm talking if you want to, but I'll be saying a lot more than what's there. Okay, so the title of the presentation today is Ecofeminist Ideas and Strategies for Climate Activism. And the way I see the program going is there's going to be a short introduction, kind of setting the scene, talking about climate change and a few other environmental things. Then I have 6 major eco-feminist concepts that a lot of the talk is going to be organized around. And I'll be introducing you to those or reminding you of those. I have a number of quotes from eco-feminist writers that I'll be sharing, and I've asked several of the members of the group to do some reading of some of the longer quotes for you. So that way you won't just be getting me talking, you'll be hearing it right from the other horses' mouths too, not just mine. And then the last part of the meeting, I'll be talking at first about a few ideas for eco-feminist climate activism that I think are important. And then I want to open it up to discussion and ask you all to come up with your own brainstorming ideas about eco-feminist climate action based on the 6 eco-feminist concepts that I'm going to be talking about, and there's a list of those 6 in the handout, so when the time comes, you'll be able to go to that. So, let's get started. In the United States, most people, when they think about remedying climate change, have this idea in mind of a goal of keeping things pretty much how they are, but with renewable energy, rather than really trying to make a big change in how the society operates. The idea is to just fix the carbon pollution, but go on kind of how we are. Maybe do a little something about poverty, or take into account that the global south needs some help. But being able to continue having the consumer goodies that they have now, and being able to eat the things that they want, and travel however much they want, and all of that seems to be on a lot of people's mind as what they see for the future. And I call that future business almost as usual. And this is also the goal that I see certainly the government in the industrial world having. And this is, of course, the people that are acknowledging that climate change even exists, because there's plenty of people that don't even want to acknowledge that. But. So, the current global goal for limiting global warming that was discussed and sort of loosely agreed to, but not in any binding way, at the Copenhagen talks in 2009, was to limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade. And at the time of the Copenhagen talks, the leader of the international negotiations was Yvo de Boer. And in 2013, Yvo de Boer said the following about the international negotiations that are going to be taking place later this fall in Paris. He said, "There is nothing that can be agreed in 2015 that would be consistent with the 2 degrees. The only way that a 2015 agreement can achieve a 2-degree goal is to shut down the whole global economy." Okay, and remember, this is the guy that has been leading the negotiations for a number of years. Okay, but then, according to the U.S. climate scientist James Hansen, who's the probably most prominent climate scientist that we have in this country, he says, international negotiations for 2 degrees of warming is actually a prescription for long-term disaster. Okay, so we've got Yvo de Boer saying we can't reach a 2-degree goal. There's just no way we could do that without just, giving up and having a different economy altogether. And then we've got our scientists saying 2 degrees isn't going to cut it. And you all have probably heard of the organization. I know the members of the Climate Forum have, but probably the rest of you have also, 350.org. And the reason they're called 350.org is that their goal is to limit carbon in the atmosphere to 350 parts per million. Now, we're already at 400 or so parts per million, probably a little over by now. And that 2-degree goal is, I think, probably about 550 parts per million. Does anybody know exactly? 550 parts per million, I think, is the part per million that's associated with the 2-degree goal. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm remembering from when I was looking at that stuff a long time ago. Okay, so, and then I just got an email from Friends of the Earth last week that said that Obama's proposal to take these big international negotiations in Paris is having a target of just under 4 degrees centigrade. Okay, so 20 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, it would have been possible for national governments and international agreements to move off fossil fuels to renewables and to make other changes to reduce carbon without needing to, as Ivo DeBoer put it, shut down the whole global economy. But now, in 2015, so much additional fossil fuel-based infrastructure has been built, including a move to extreme energy sources like the tar sands and shale oil and natural gas fracking. And so much carbon has already been injected into the atmosphere that governments can't both, keep the globally capitalist economy functioning with business almost as usual, and at the same time limit carbon in the atmosphere to a safe limit, even a limit like 2 degrees that isn't really anywhere near safe. Okay, now what I just stated is my own interpretation of the data. It's not somebody else's. That's how I see it. So what are climate activists to do given this dilemma? The answer that is obvious to me is that it is past time to adopt strategies that do shut down the whole global economy and replace that economy and the culture that supports that economy with better options. So the need to take action to replace what I call capitalist patriarchy with better options is made even more apparent if you look beyond climate, because we have so many other terribly critical problems going on in this society. Scientists are now saying that we've entered the 6th extinction of life on Earth. So we're killing life on Earth. There's all the environmental problems, pollution, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, destruction of entire ecosystems, turning the Alberta tar sands into a moonscape. Environmental devastation is terrible. Then there's war and terrorism, violence against women, rape, incest, sexual slavery, honor killing, genital mutilation, et cetera, slavery, poverty, and all the ethical issues like carbon pollution, where the global north takes from the global south and from the wildlife and nature of the earth, and then the peak oil issues and peak everything, as Mr. Heinberg has talked about in one of his books. So I think that Einstein's quote, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them," is highly applicable to the current situation. And I think that the eco-feminist perspectives that I'm going to talk about today come from a very different point of view, and that are very worth thinking about in terms of solving all of these problems, hopefully. So some of the elements of the eco-feminist perspective I'm going to talk about today are that business almost as usual perpetuates capitalist patriarchy, and capitalist patriarchy is killing the planet through its practices of domination, exploitation, violence, and growth. Radical change is needed. Change that goes, and the word radical comes from the word root. It's about going to the root of our problems instead of, skimming the surface, trying to change. Dominant culture lacks perspective to solve the problems it caused. The view from below, the view of women, people of the global south, people living subsistence ways of life, indigenous people, those are the views that are desirable for solving the problems caused by the dominant culture. And then also I would say that shutting down the whole global economy carefully sounds like a pretty good idea as part of shutting down capitalist patriarchy, not as a crash. So I'd like to ask you for the next chunk of time, while we're in here, to take on the idea that maybe this planet-killing society is not the best option for us or anyone else on the planet. Try to take on the eco-feminist perspective and the view from below and see how it feels. So The term "the view from below" comes from this very incredible ecofeminist book called The Subsistence Perspective by Maria Mize and Veronica Benholt-Thompson. And I'm going to pass the book around. You can take a look at it. I really recommend reading it if you're so inclined at some point. And we're gonna start here with a story that and I'm going to call them when I'm talking about them today. It's just too big a mouthful to get out those last names. I'm going to talk to them about them as Maria and Veronica, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind. They're just, a bunch of feminists like the rest of us. Be fine with them. Anyway, we're going to start out with a story from this book, and Ida is going to read it for us. And this is in April of 1995, Hillary Clinton visited Maishahadi village in Bangladesh to find out how the microcredit project of the Grameen Bank was working for the women there. And Hillary asked them a bunch of questions. When she was done asking them questions, they turned around and started asking her questions. So I'm just going to read you from the book.
Pa, which means elder sister, do you have cows? No, I have no cows, she said. Pa, do you have your own income? Well, formerly I used to have my own income, but since my husband became president and moved to the White House, I've stopped earning my own money. How many children do you have? One daughter. Would you like to have more children? Yes, I would like to have one or two more, but we are quite happy with our daughter Chelsea. The women of the Maishahadi looked at each other and murmured, poor Hillary. She has no house, no income of her own. She only has one daughter. In the eyes of the Maishahadi women, Hillary Clinton was not empowered. They felt sorry for her. Maria and Veronica go on to explain of the Bangladeshi women. Theirs is a perspective from below, from what is necessary. Theirs is a subsistence perspective. If one looks at the world from this perspective, all things and relations appear in a different light. Particularly, the concept of what constitutes a good life is different from that of Miss Clinton and most of her rich sisters in the North, who think that a good life requires a lot of money, a lot of goods, and a lot of luxuries, and that rich countries of the North and rich classes elsewhere are the places where this so-called good life can be found. All others they consider poor. Maria and Veronica propose 5 lessons to be learned from the Bangladeshi women, and the first and the only one we'll talk about now is the view from below. This means that when we look at reality, when we want to gain clarity about where to go and what to do, we start with the perspective of women, particularly rural women and poor urban women of the South. Further, we start with everyday life and its politics, the strategies of women to keep life going. This view from below enables us to demystify the delusions created by those on top, that their life and lifestyle are not only the best possible ones, but also the image of the future for everyone on this planet. This demystification helps us to see that this so-called good life is possible only for minorities, and moreover, that it is at the expense of others, of nature, of other people, of living things. Thank you. A big surprise. So, taking the view from below, the way of life of people in the industrial world is not a desirable way of life at all, and is causing huge problems for nature and people everywhere. The way of life we in the industrial world are clinging to is just bad news. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be focusing on 6 basic ecofeminist concepts, key concepts today. And the first ecofeminist concept then
is the view from below, as we just heard explained. Okay, I'd like to take a short trip into some history of ecofeminism now. The term ecofeminism was coined by a French woman in the early 70s, whose name I'm about to torture, but it's something like Françoise de Bon. And she wrote a book called Feminism or Death, and called for women to lead an ecological revolution to save the planet. And Rhea is going to read an excerpt from her book for you now.
Okay, Francois quote. Practically everyone knows that the two most immediate threats of death today are overpopulation and the destruction of natural resources. Fewer are aware of the entire responsibility of the male system, the system as male and not capitalist or socialist, in creating these two perilous situations. But very few have yet discovered that each one of the two menaces is the logical outcome of one of the two parallel discoveries, which gave power to men 50 centuries ago. Reproduction and the capability of sowing the earth as they do women. Until that time, women alone possessed a monopoly on agriculture, and the men believed women were impregnated by the gods. Upon discovering the two possibilities at once, agricultural and procreational, man launched what Lederer has called the great upheaval toward his own benefit. Having seized control of the soil, thus of fertility, later industry, and of the woman's womb, thus of fecundity, it was logical that the over-exploitation of the one and the other would result in this double peril, menacing and parallel. Overpopulation, a glut of births, and destruction of the environment, a glut of products. The only mutation which can save the world, therefore, is the great upheaval of male power, which brought about first agricultural overexploitation, then lethal industrial expansion. Not a matriarchy, of course, or power to women, but the destruction of power by women, and finally the way out of the tunnel, egalitarian administration of the world being reborn, and no longer protected as the soft first wave ecologists believed.
Thanks, Rhea.
Wow.
So that's from the early 70s. Those women back then really had something to say. So out of that, I'm going to just take the second ecofeminist concept that I've identified as really important, which is women's power and women's action. And patriarchy is at the center of critical environmental and other problems. And in order to end patriarchy and ecological destruction, women must act to remove the system of male power. But it's women that need to act, you know. And I agree a lot with what François was saying, that we don't want a society controlled by women in the end, but I do think that we need to have women as primary actors in the revolution or transformation that we need to change society. So, in thinking about the history of ecofeminism, it seems to me that there are two major threads kind of going through it, or directions that it's come from, ways that it's emerged. And one is that it emerged out of the second wave feminist movement, probably originating in the U.S. and Europe, Australia. And in this part of this sort of thrust in the ecofeminist movement, Got a lot of writing, a lot of philosophy, a lot of analysis, and a lot of action, direct action, as in against nuclear power plants, military pollution, the women's peace camps in the early 80s, those kinds of things. But it's kind of a more, to some extent, think it through sort of ecofeminism. But there's also this whole sort of this upswelling that's come from women in all parts of the world, and including the industrialized countries as well, who have had their ways of life, their homes threatened by environmental devastation, and have responded to that. So in that kind of situation, you have, this local problem, environmental problem, and women join together to take action against it.
Like Mayflower.
Yeah, like Mayflower. Love Canal is one that happened a long time ago. And then in the global south, things like the Chipko movement, and in India, where the governments and corporations and local loggers even were coming in and taking down forests, and the women would hug the trees or do other actions to just keep the men out of the forest. And a lot of times, even if you have men and women both living in the global south in a kind of subsistence situation, a lot of times the women continue doing a subsistence lifestyle, but the men are the ones that the corporations or governments identify as they should be growing export crops. And so they get kind of pulled into the global economy while the women are still kind of living their traditional ways of life. And so the men are sort of out of it